Those of you who are graduating this afternoon with high honors, awards, and distinctions, I say well done. And as I like to tell the C students, you too can be president.
Hi everyone, how are y'all? Let me know if you can hear me. We're talking about affirmative action today. And the overturning of what was left of affirmative action by the Supreme Court of the United States. So for those of you that are new here on this channel, welcome to Wine and Chill. I'm Stephanie, your favorite recovering lawyer, where we discuss things over a glass of wine. And yes, I figured we would start with a 1GW, the world's, maybe not the world's, but America's most famous C student. So that better have played, because if it didn't, I'm just going to redo this entire thing. All right. And I missed y'all. We didn't do a live last week. It was a little hectic. I had some friends in town. So we are getting right back into it. Because there were three, hold on, for Georgie plays again. There were three Supreme Court cases last week in which the opinions were delivered. So we're going to cover all three. The first one being affirmative action. So we're going to discuss that, the overturning of affirmative action. And then tomorrow it will come out. Student loan forgiveness, unfortunately, has been struck down by the Supreme Court. So that edited video, the student loan forgiveness update, will come out tomorrow. And then also tomorrow, we are going to go over the Supreme Court's decision to legalize discrimination against the LGBTQ plus community. We're going to talk about that on Instagram Live. I don't know what time. And then that'll get posted to Patreon. All right. So now we're going to get into it. So here is our tentative agenda. First and foremost, a little bit of an overview of what exactly the ruling was. The opinion, you can find it online. I'm going to link it as well in the description box, is about 237 or 57, can't remember exactly, pages of foolishness of, and quote, the usage of colorblind 48 times. And there's nothing colorblind in this country besides people who are actually, and unfortunately, have certain, cannot see various colors, but not in the way that it was applied. All right, so we'll talk about that. Then we're going to do a little affirmative action 101, in that a lot of people, because they like to be loud and wrong, don't know what affirmative action is. They just know that the words AA in all forms make them very angry, so they say foolishness. Also, a fly has gotten into my room, so that's probably flying around there. And then we're going to talk about the boogeyman behind the overturning of affirmative action, which is Edward Blum, since he wants his 5 seconds in the sun, and he's been trying to overturn affirmative action for literally 30 plus years. We're going to give him some time. And then the lie of legacy, which is that going after Black students versus going after the legacy admissions, to which a whopping 75% of students in elite institutions such as Harvard get in. Under 40% of them are from legacy admissions. And of that 40%, 75% of them do not qualify for the school, such as one George W. Bush, who when he went to his private boarding school of Andover, he made C's. And he then continued to be a C student at Yale. Fascinating. All right. And then last but not least, once we go through legacy, we're going to talk about Clarence Thomas, because Clarence Thomas is a special type of C word and a special type of villain. So we're going to get into why did we get here and why he is so gleefully happy to strike down affirmative action. Because for him to somehow be legally so smart, he is quite dumb. All right, let's get into it. Okay, so a big, huge thank you to the Patreon first and foremost, and an extra shout out to Courtney, Edna, Juanita, and Judy. And I feel like, and David, I was like, I'm missing somebody. And David, thank you all for keeping the lights on over here at Wine and Chill. I appreciate you all. If you want, go ahead, feel free to join the Patreon. It helps, this channel run. All right. Exactly this. Courtney, the SCOTUS chose violence before their summer break. I was highly annoyed that they decided they were going to issue these opinions on Thursday and Friday consecutively before an alleged holiday weekend. That no, I don't celebrate, but that's not the point. Everyone deserved, in the words of my little niece, to enjoy Happy Firework Day. All right. So the case that we are discussing is the Students for Fair Admissions, Inc., which they're against anything that has to do with fair admissions. I find it very interesting when alt-right conservative organizations name their charitable, quote unquote, organizations after things that seem so innocuous at first, versus the president and fellows of Harvard College. And they're also, so this was two consolidated cases. One was against Harvard and the other one was against UNC. All right. Now, we're just going to quickly, before we get into everything, go through what the facts are of the case, because I've seen a lot of misinformation about this. So this is from the opinion directly. At Harvard, for those of us that did not go to Harvard, at Harvard, essentially the way their admission process works, each application for admission is initially screened by a first reader who assigns a numerical score in each of 6 categories: academic, extracurricular, athletic, school support, personal, and overall. For the overall category, so now this is 1/6 of your application, a composite of the 5 other ratings a first reader can and does consider the applicant's race. So the race, again, is not even one of the main considerations, the first 6. It is a subsection of the overall. That should be noted, because people really think that Harvard is just letting all the Negroes in, and that is not what happened. Harvard admissions subcommittees then review all applications from a particular geographic area. A lot of the elite institutions, I would say most competitive schools these days, they want to see a range of students from at least all 50 states. So you are more likely to get into Harvard if you live in a state that has less population than if you live in Florida, Texas, or California, for example, which are the largest states with the largest population. All right, where did I go? Okay, these regional subcommittees make recommendations to the full admissions committee, and they take an applicant's race into account. When the 40-member full admissions committee begins its deliberation, it discusses the relative breakdown of applicants by race. The goal of the process, according to Harvard's directors of admissions, is ensuring that there is no dramatic drop-off in minority admissions from the prior class. Okay. So that was the way they used to do their admissions, which people took issue with. UNC has a similar process, and they also have various people review their process as well. So we're not going to go through all of that. And then we're just going to get straight into the opinion, which said Harvard and UNC's admissions programs violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. I cannot reiterate nor stress how wild it is that the 14th Amendment is being used in this way. The 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause, was ratified after the Civil War to ensure that Black people had rights, and is now being used to strip away rights from said Black people. That's crazy. This is the largest load of malarkey I've ever seen in my life. So specifically, a brief history lesson from SCOTUS, who apparently likes to use history when they feel like it. Proposed by Congress and ratified by the states in the wake of the Civil War, the 14th Amendment provides that no state shall deny to any person the equal protections of the laws. Proponents of the Equal Protection Clause described its foundational principle as not permitting any distinction of law based on race or color. Any law which operates upon one man, they maintained, should operate equally upon all. Accordingly, at this court's earliest interpreting the Equal Protection Clause explained, the 14th Amendment guaranteed that the law in the states shall be that the same for the Blacks as for the white, that all persons, whether colored or white, shall stand equal before the law of the states. The Equal Protection Clause, while ratified almost 2 centuries ago, has yet to live up to what it has promised, which is equal protection under the law for everyone. And it should be noted from the beginning that equality and equity is 2 different things. Equality means, okay, we're all going to run a race. We'll all start the race at 5:12 p.m. EST. Equity would say, well, you know what? As much as Stephanie tries, Stephanie will have no sense of time. So Stephanie, technically, we're going to tell her the race is going to start at 5 p.m. So by 5:12, she actually starts running the race. And so that's always early. We'll tell them the exact time, etc. So that way we all have everything we need to actually run the race. That's what equity is. The Equal Protection Clause has never been used in this place, which is why we have the EEOC, which The EEOC, I always forget, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is a federal agency, was established to make sure that corporations, companies, the government itself was not discriminating against Black people. For another ethnic minority to use the Equal Protection Clause in this manner is flabbergasting. And we talked about this on Patreon when this case was first initiated, and we're going to get into this here as well. This is a small subsection of Asian American parents that have decided to be used in this manner to get affirmative action taken down. Overwhelmingly, when polled, the large amount of Asian American people in this country do agree with and believe in affirmative action. But when you let a few people let the devil use them, then everyone, gets mud on their face. All right. So affirmative action 101, a little brief history. This is from the American Association for Access, Equity, and Diversity. I'm going to make me small because it's really small so y'all can see this. I'll just remove me. Okay, perfect. So the first time affirmative action was ever used in the United States in this context is 1961 by President John F. Kennedy's executive order used affirmative action by instructing federal contractors to take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are treated equally without regard to race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Then you have 1964 Civil Rights Act, which was signed into law. This landmark legislation, which largely a lot of our laws are based off of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And we needed the 1964 Civil Rights Act because the 14th Amendment, although enacted again after the Civil War, was never actually put into place. We had Reconstruction for about 8 years in the South, and then you had total Jim Crow segregation. So 100 years later, finally, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And then you had to enshrine the 1964 Civil Rights Act through numerous other things. Okay, so then you have 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued Executive Order 11246, requiring all government contractors and subcontractors to take affirmative action to expand job opportunities for minorities, e.g., Black people. It has been expanded because we do have other ethnic minorities in terms of population size in this country now. A lot of the things you'll see with affirmative action wouldn't have been necessary if we had passed many years ago 40 acres and a mule for Black American people. Hold on one second. But that never happened. Hold on. Okay. I wanted to double check and see if I could find that citation, but I can't find it fast enough. Largely. Okay. And then you have 1966. So the EEOC promulgates regulations that requires employers with at least 100 employees or government contractors with 50 employees to fill out EEO-1 private sector report annually. That's largely if you apply to a company that has a certain amount of employees at the company, you have to select your race. It's because they have to do annual reporting to say, hey, we're treating everyone fairly, each applicant. At the time when this passed in the 60s, not that many Americans were able to attend college. So it then trickles into college admissions as well. But at the time, college is mainly reserved for upper middle class people. Okay, so now we're going to 1973. You have the Nixon administration issued memorandum permissible goals and timetables in state and local governments, distinguishing between proper goals and timetables and impermissible quotas. A lot of times when people quote misinformation about affirmative action, they say it's not fair that Black people get a quota system. Quota system hasn't existed in decades. Enough. Read a book, preferably one from the library. Don't buy anything from Amazon. Quota system has not existed for decades in this country. And initially the quota system was to require government contractors to say like, hey, there were 100 applicants, at least 10 of these applications, when they get approved, need to be Black people. Okay. Make me small again. And then you have 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court in Regents for University of California. This is the first time you're now seeing affirmative action, which was applied in colleges, people are legislating against it. Upheld the use of race as one factor. Again, it has always been one factor or a sub-factor in a holistic application. in choosing among qualified applications. Again, what people were realizing was qualified Black students were not getting into these schools, which is why you have HBCUs. HBCUs were created, a lot of them by rich white people. That's a different conversation. Were created because Black students were literally denied opportunity to attend any of these predominantly white schools. So in that specific case, in 1978, you have the Supreme Court upheld that the use of race as one factor in choosing among qualified applicants for admission was totally fine. However, it ruled that it was unlawful for the university's medical school practice of reserving 18 seats in each entering class of 100 for disadvantaged minority students. Now, if 100 students are getting in and they said 18 are for Black, Latino, and Asian students, that's not even that many. It has never been a question, if not, as to whether or not the students being admitted were A, in large numbers, that's never occurred, or B, were unqualified. They were qualified to begin with. Okay. And then just so you see like the length of time people have been arguing about this, because the 1964 Civil Rights Act, we have largely seen, while it was great in theory and it was written beautifully, the states and the federal government didn't particularly listen to it. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush, that's GW's dad, signed the Civil Rights Act of 1991. They had to sign an entire new act to be like, hey, y'all made all these promises to Black people that you should probably keep up, that you're not doing. Okay. Then you have 1995, President Bill Clinton reviewed all affirmative action guidelines by federal agencies and declared his support for affirmative action programs by announcing the administration's policy of mend it, don't end it, which this is the beginning in the 90s of people saying, you know what, a lot of people feel like this is unfair. Let's not end affirmative action, but let's chip away at it. The chipping away of affirmative action has occurred since that time. So then you have 1995, Senator Robert Dole and Representative Charles Kennedy introduced the so-called Equal Opportunity Act in Congress. Again, all these things that sound so great and really they're just designed to go after Black people. The act would prohibit race or gender-based affirmative action in federal programs, and we skipped over it from the beginning. It is in the late 60s that they added gender to affirmative action, specifically to allow more white women to also reap the benefits. And statistically, overwhelmingly, over the past 5 decades, the largest beneficiary of affirmative action has been white women. In 1995, the regents, and this is the first time affirmative action is struck down in public education. The regents of the University of California voted to end affirmative action programs at all University of California campuses, beginning in 1997 for graduate schools and 1998 for undergraduate admissions. Officials in the university were no longer allowed to use race, gender, ethnicity, or national origin as a factor in admissions decisions. And unbeknownst to many people, California is the first state that banned affirmative action to very dire consequences. And there are 9 states before this that had banned affirmative action. One, unsurprisingly to me, having been grew up there, is Florida. Florida banned affirmative action, depending on where you read, either 1999 or 2001. And I find it very fascinating, and we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to Clarence Thomas, that even though affirmative action was banned in, let's say, the middle ground, the year 2000 in the state of Florida, that did not stop entitled, let's call them entitled Edwards at the University of Central Florida to make offhand remarks to me and other Black students in the class saying that we only got into the school because of affirmative action, when affirmative action hadn't existed at that point for 10 years. Fascinating. Fascinating the things people will say when they simply just don't measure up. All right. So, did we get through all of it? Do we need to do this section? Let's see. I think we're good. So then you have Texas here as well, and then you have more of California, 96 and 97. So what exactly happened? Because what happened in California is what you see across all other states and what we're going to see holistically across the nation now that this affirmative action ban is going to go into place. So from NPR, here's what happened when affirmative action ended at California public colleges. Okay, I'll probably make this a little bigger. Let's do this one. Perfect. So essentially, It has been, California ended affirmative action in 97 and 98, respectively, for graduate schools and undergraduate schools. So essentially, the state schools in California have pushed back, and they actually wrote an amicus curiae brief in solidarity with Harvard and UNC, stating like, hey, we tried this, and this has been going on now for 30 years, and this is the worst thing we've done. And we should have never done this, but because their Board of Regents put that basically into law in the state of California, they can't undo it. They could, but anyways. So those programs, so essentially what they stated was a quarter century after California banned race-based admissions. And I think it's kind of disingenuous when a lot of these schools, the publications, NPR is usually pretty even keel, will say race-based admissions. It never was race-based. Race-based would mean your race is one entire factor and you're going to get 10 plus more points. It never was that. It was holistically, if we're looking at it this way, let's take into account that you grew up in this area and you are this race. And because you are this race and we live in a white supremacist patriarchy, you have likely had to deal with these issues. That's all it ever was. And people largely like to ignore the fact that the United States is overwhelmingly, in most schools, particularly in the South, but very much in the North as well. You can look at Chicago, very segregated. The US is still living in segregation, and schools that are predominantly Black or Latino are severely underfunded because property tax pays for schools, and because we have systemic racism, most of the schools that service students that are Black or Latino receive less funding. And when you receive less funding, you do not get the same opportunities that you would get if you were able to attend a better funded school. All right. So 30 years later, the schools of California have stated that they haven't been able to meet their diversity and equity goals despite more than $500 million spent on outreach and alternative admission standards. So they spent all this money on marketing, and they still are like, dang, without affirmative action and us doing this, we're still not letting in that many Black students. All right. Further stating that years of crafting alternative race-neutral policies have fallen short. You cannot have race-neutral policies in a racist place. It doesn't work. Those programs have enabled UC to make significant gains in its system-wide diversity, the brief said. Yet, despite its extensive efforts, UC struggles to enroll a student body that is sufficiently racially diverse to attain the educational benefits of diversity. And one of the things not stated in this specific article is that you have schools, for example, in California, if we're looking at LA is a very diverse place. You have white people in LA, Black people, Asian people, Latino people. And then you have schools such as UCLA that are not representative of the graduating high school classes of this very diverse neighborhood. But that's all right, though, because people are still out here, if you have the money, scamming to get their kids into USC, which is wild. So in the year of 1998, when the University of California and all the subsequent branches of UC decided to do away with affirmative action, that year specifically, enrollment among Black and Latino students at UCLA and UC Berkeley fell by 40%, according to a 2020 study. As a result of the ban, Bleemer found that Black and Latino students who might have gotten into those top two schools enrolled at less competitive campuses. It then, and the important part of like why this matters, not just because you don't get the benefit of going to a better funded school that you should be able to go to, it is the long-term outlook of what happens when you now graduate from this other school that doesn't necessarily have the name recognition. So there was, in terms of Black and Latino students, you see that they performed poorly in the long run in the labor market. However, there was no commensurate gain in long run outcomes for white and Asian students who took their place. As in, it literally just hurts Black people and doesn't actually do anything better for anybody else. All right. And they further went on to say, if you follow them, so these are the Black and Latino students, into the labor market for the subsequent 15 or 20 years, they're earning about 5% lower wages. And that's the average. That means a few of them are doing really, really well, and some of them are doing really poorly. So if we were to look at the mean instead of the median, it's probably that percentage of lower wage is probably higher. that would have earned if they had access to more selective universities under affirmative action. And even now, when they're starting to do a lot of this outreach, they're still having problems enrolling students because students largely do not, besides Clarence Thomas, do not want to be the token. They don't want to be the only brown face in the room. So even the students that have the grades and the abilities to get into these schools are like, why would I do that? Why would I go ostracize myself? One of my best friends growing up, super smart, got a full ride to Princeton. We're from Miami. What's she gonna do in Jersey, in an Ivy League institution where there are 5 other Jamaicans? Like, what was gonna happen? She didn't go. She didn't go because largely she was afraid that the culture shock, and she's like, I'm already going to be away from home. There aren't going to be any other that many Black people. I don't want to go. And it was really interesting, like having a conversation with her parents and like with my dad, and everyone agreed, which was if you put a Black person, most Black people in these spaces where they are designed to ostracize you, what is going to happen? What is the purpose of it? Instead of the school saying like, hey, our incoming class should look and represent the high school seniors of the country, because then it would be more diverse. Then you wouldn't be the only one. There would at least be 10 of you, and then it would be all right. Okay, so let us continue, which brings me to the boogeyman who needs some time in the sun. So I'm sure y'all remember Becky with the bad grades, whose name was really Abigail Fisher to be specific. When did this case come out? I think when I was in law school. When I was in law school, a young redheaded woman sued the University of Texas, stating that their 1% rule, which Texas has a rule that if you are in the top 1% of any college or any high school, in the state of Texas, you automatically get into certain schools, and they base their scholarship program across that. So if you live in Texas has a very large Mexican population, all of those Mexican-American students from those schools were getting into University of Texas, for example, Rice, etc. Actually, Rice is a private school. I don't know if Rice was included. Abigail sued and was like, it's not fair that I have not gotten into the University of Texas and I should have been allowed to get in, and it's all of these Black and brown people running up the admissions, and this is completely discriminatory, and cries in quote unquote reverse racism. However, once Abigail decided to put her face out there, it was top 6%. Okay, thank you. I can't remember the exact percentage. We'll have to look it up. However, once Abigail put all of her business out there and went all the way to the Supreme Court, people did a very easy dig into, well, Abigail, dear, what were your grades? That how dare they accept these people who are not as smart as you? Abigail didn't have the grades. Abigail was not as bright as she thought she was, which is why she didn't get into the school. Because for her, as a white woman, who are, again, the largest beneficiaries because gender is allowed to be used as a factor in affirmative action, she still didn't get in. And so the internet went through with many, many memes about Abigail Fisher. One as here, loses Supreme Court case claiming white discrimination. Turns out her grades just sucked. There was nothing exceptional nor special about Abigail, which is why she didn't get in. And largely, if you look up pictures of Abigail at this time, you'll see pictures, and this is the most clear picture of him, of Abigail and a mysterious, seemingly lanky white man behind her. And that man is her godfather, Edward Blum. And I don't know what Abigail did when she was a small child for Edward to hate her so much that he made her the face of reverse racism in education. I have no idea. Edward Blum decided way before Abigail was born that he hated affirmative action, that he hated all of it. And from 1990 onward, he made it his life's mission to do away with affirmative action. And many of the Supreme Court cases against affirmative action, anything having to do with equality in this place, Edward Blum funds them. So we did a whole deep dive into Mr. Blum over on Patreon a couple months ago when this first came out. So we're going to go ahead and go through this. And I think it's important also to note how incredibly terrifying it is that someone can literally make it their whole personality to be so hateful and to also be able to fundraise this type of money to do what he did. Is Fisher and her father, Richard Fisher, Abby's last name is Fisher, and Blum formed Students for Fair Admissions. Students for Fair Admissions are the organization that is suing in these cases. Blum said, okay, it didn't work with this white woman. Fine, Abby, god niece, goddaughter, whatever, go away. Let me go round up some other people. And that's all that has happened. A Virginia nonprofit. In 2014, Fisher is the group's secretary and officer alongside Blum and her dad. So Abby is equally to blame at this point. She is a grown woman in her 30s. At this point, she is participating in farce and nonsense. However, it's not her design. The group has 2 cases. Mind you, they are all the way behind all of it, which is very interesting. It's going to, is it in this part? I might skip ahead and then come back. Okay, let me skip ahead and then come back because I realize it's not. Just to talk about Edward Blum. So I'll make a mental note to come back. So people, I should have pulled up one of the memes. The meme that went around, people realized Abby didn't get in because Abby didn't have the grades, was they made a bunch of memes said, Becky with the bad grades. So while you're busy mocking Abigail Fisher, the powerful racist forces behind her are getting a pass. And this came out in 2016. The man behind the curtain. So this was an article basically about exactly because Edward has bigger plans than this. And this is why Edward is a wild, scary person, to be quite frank. When Abigail Fisher was still in diapers, the man who would eventually steer her case toward the Supreme Court was making his first attacks upon race-conscious laws, initially as a plaintiff. Remember, Edward is the architect of all of these lawsuits. Edward is not a lawyer. He's a disgruntled white man. Though he is not a lawyer, Blum decided to advance his racist ideology in the courts after 2 failed runs for office in the 1990s. With the support of a number of conservative donors, such as the Bradley Foundation, Blum has spent years organizing and filing lawsuits on the behalf of others against laws and practices that support racial equality under the auspices of his innocuously, such a hard word to say, innocuously named Project on Fair Representation. It is extremely dangerous, in my opinion. The man ran for public office. He lost 2 times. And so instead of, going and being a racist by himself, he was like, absolutely not. Power is going to find me and I'm going to find power. So all he does now and all he has done for literally the better part of 30 years is just get people to file lawsuits, fundraise money to file lawsuits to get them to challenge anything that has to do with racial equity. Education is the tipping point. He wants to challenge all of affirmative action, all of EEOC, all of equal rights. Deep sigh. So that is Edward Blum, who has literally been, I would say, mostly flying under the radar for all these years. Now that it's coming out, you can find a few articles about him discussing him. But the fact that, again, if you ask, I would say, the average person on the street who maybe occasionally gets news, from the Apple News section or, might watch a little bit on YouTube. Most people truly, one of the things Edward realized when he tried to do this with Abigail was people were not going to rally behind his goddaughter with bad grades. It was like, well, Abby, honey, you weren't going to get it on the merit. Like, what are we talking about? So what he did was pull the oldest trick in the white supremacist book, which is, let's just pit the minorities against each other. And he got a few, again, it's not a large amount, but it's enough where it's visible. He got a few Asian American parents who believe largely, immigrants at large, regardless of race, believe in the lie of meritocracy in America, who believed in it so much and were like, my kid is the smartest. You told me what the rubric was. I enrolled my kid in all these extra things. I paid all this extra money. What do you mean they didn't get into Harvard? All I want is my kid to get into Harvard. They have one singular goal. It riled them up and then used them to be like, see, the Asians are also upset. It's not just middle-class white people who are undeserving and in the case of Abigail don't have the grades. We have also upset the model minority, quote unquote, in this place, and this cannot stand. Edward Blum, nor any white supremacist, does not give a damn about Asian people. He does not care. It is simply a pawn in his Ponzi scheme of his large hatred of Black people. And he will swap them out for any other model minority when he feels like it, when he starts to go after other things. And that I need people to largely get in their brain. That playing buddy-buddy with a white supremacist will not get you anything because we're not going to see now a large rise, percentage-wise, of Asian American students in Harvard, in UNC. No. You're going to continue to see this large amount of white students versus everyone else. That's all that's going to continue while people continue to think an SAT score of 1600, which is the perfect score, and a GPA unweighted of 4.0 will get you in. They will just create other factors and say, hey, you know what? I don't think that's good enough. Actually, you need other things. which I think if this is in the right order, we're going to get on to legacy admissions. Let's see. Okay, it's not. One more thing. I think it might be after this. Sometimes I forget what order I put these things in. This is from the Supreme Court opinion as well. So the petitioner, Students for Fair Admissions, is a nonprofit organization whose stated purposes is to defend human and civil rights secured by law, including the right of individuals to equal protection under the law. Students for Fair Admissions was started by Edward Blum. Students for Fair Admissions does not care about equal protection under the law. Students for Fair Admissions cares that there are the least amount of Black people in these schools. That's all they care about. SFFA filed separate lawsuits against Harvard and UNC. They filed both. He filed both of them. The named defendants are irrelevant. Thank you so much, Robert. I appreciate you. All right. And again, I cannot reiterate how completely flabbergasting this is, that this white supremacist said, you know that law that we passed to protect Black people? I'm going to use that law and harass Black people. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, arguing that race-based admissions programs is a violation of both, when both of them were designed to help Black people. That's wild. I'm sure if you ask most of the parents that he bamboozled into this, they can't even tell you what Title VII is, nor the Civil Rights Act. The Civil Rights Act, which largely led to the 1965 Immigration Act, which allowed them to come into this country. They couldn't, child. I don't know. I don't know. Which brings us to what would have been the sensible thing, particularly for a set of people who largely believe in meritocracy and believe in meritocracy by the numbers. The sensible thing would have been to attack legacy admissions. Because legacy admissions is letting in people like America's favorite C student, George W. Bush. Now, this is from The Darkest Hue. Y'all should go follow her over on Instagram. She did a great, what do they call it, carousel of the issues of legacy admissions. So I figured we would attribute this to her and go through this as well. So the entitlement in some applicants feel to elite institutions, is paradoxical. Every year, news stories circulate about white or Asian students with near perfect GPAs and exceptional SAT scores being denied admissions to multiple, if not all, Ivy League institutions. Critics of affirmative action often highlight these stories to argue that white and Asian students face unfair treatment in the college admissions process. However, the reality is that when you apply to these elite institutions, you're already competing with a pool of academically talented students. Your impressive GPA, standardized test scores are far less remarkable and stand out when many competing applicants have similar credentials. Ivy League institutions reject valedictorians every year. It should be noted, one of my dear friends, her good friend is a college admissions consultant. Fancy. AKA, if you have the money, you can hire a very smart, younger-ish person who's familiar with the college application processes of Ivy League schools in the United States, and they will tell you the grades are just the entry point. The grades are not going to get you in. If everyone is scoring these high grades, they're letting in Olympians. They're letting in kids who are working 3-4 jobs to support a whole family. They're letting in kids who started a nonprofit in their area, who care about their community. Again, they're letting in kids who have the athletics and the academics. You trying to gamify, which you can, a standardized test is not proving that holistically you are a good fit for the student body. I will never forget, when I was in high school, I went to one of the best magnet schools. Actually, it was the best magnet school in the state of Florida at the time, and the best one in Miami, hands down. Shout out to Coral Reef. It was the 13th best public high school in the country. Got into that school, it was a lottery system. They're like, hey, you're either going to the D school or a miracle will happen. You get to go to the A school. I got to go. It was great. I had a lot of AP classes. AP classes are advanced placement classes. They look good on your college application. You can test into getting college credit, etc. In my geography class, I'll never forget this. My grade, I had an A in the class, and I had done the math. I was like, even if I flunk this last test, I will either get a B in the class. I'd already gotten to UCS, so I didn't really care, to be honest. Hopefully my dad don't see this. Either I'll get a B in the class or I'll still get an A as long as I get a C or better on the test. I didn't study for my test. I didn't care. I was like, child, I'm a senior. I've already gotten to the school I wanted to go. I'm mentally packed. I don't care. I had read, or learned maybe in my math class that I had to have tutoring for because math is not my ministry, that statistically, the way that people set up standardized testing, so with a Scantron, is people love patterns. So whoever is the test maker, so your teacher, your professor in this instance, they have a pattern. And I was like, okay, well, I've gotten mostly A's on most of these tests. What is the pattern for this teacher? I was like, I'm a Christmas tree this test. And I sure did. And guess what I got on the test? A B minus. A B minus on a test I didn't study for, I didn't read the questions for, and I was like, whatever down the thing. You can gamify standardized testing, which is why there are now a lot of proponents saying standardized testing is not a good indicator of IQ. It's not a good indicator of whether or not you have good cognition skills, whether you understand something, because you can figure out with enough practice how to gamify the test. The reason why this is largely unfair is the more money you have and the more money your parents have, your friends, your family have, the more access you have to getting standardized testing tutoring. For example, I'm the oldest of 7. One of my younger siblings, 2 of them, are almost to the age where they're going to college. My little brother, shout out to him, smart kid, will likely, fingers crossed, graduate valedictorian. We didn't have the money to get me SAT prep. I was like, well, I'm gonna order the book. Went to Barnes & Noble, got the book, studied, and I was like, I got what I got. I have access to it. I know that he has to do well on this test. I got him tutoring. Me and my mom shared it. He'll have more access to things that I don't have. Largely, the data has shown, and according to Darkest Hue here, is that the correlation is not that Black students are doing poorly on these tests because we're not as smart. The correlation has to do with economic correlation, which is when you do not have the money, you cannot afford the standardized testing. So you don't learn all those tips and tricks that you need in order to gamify the test. So specifically, a common argument opponents of affirmative action use in that Black applicants have lower test scores than white and Asian students. While this is generally true, it does not mean that Black students are less intelligent than white and Asian students. Performance on the SAT is positively correlated with family income, and on average, Black individuals in the United States tend to have lower household income because of systemic racism. And again, what are we at? 61 cents, 69 cents Black women make to a white man's $1. That is why we're overwhelmingly, holistically together a little bit poor. Okay. Black individuals tend to have lower household incomes compared to other races and ethnic groups. The SAT and other standardized tests do not accurately gauge intellectual ability. They gauge students' access to resources that would help them succeed on standardized tests. So here, I know it's really small. Sorry, let me move me up so I can lean in. You can see on the right-hand side, for a family income level of less than $20,000, the average SAT score, the highest you can get is 1,600, is 970. If your family makes between 40 and 60, it's 1070. If your family makes between 100,000 and 140,000, 1150, over 200,000, 1230. So you see, the more money your family makes, the higher you are, the more likely you are to get a higher score. And it's not because being in a rich family automatically makes you smart. We saw that with the USC scandal, in which the parents had all the money in the world and the kids still didn't have sense. Then all the money in the world and your kid is still with a dunce cap, that would piss me off, truthfully. If I spent all this money and you're over here fooling around, not even attending the SAT prep, so the parents did foolishness, where they ended up in jail for a week because they had other people taking their SAT test. The more money your parents or the people around you have, the more likely, like similar with me and my brother, they're able to afford and be like, hey, also SAT prep is not cheap, as I've learned with my brother. For month long of SAT prep. Ooh, don't quote me because we split it. I think it was $1,200. That's because I have the money saved up. I have the money to be like, hey, yeah, I believe in you. I know you're going to do it. I want you to have the best possible opportunity. And honestly, we ain't got no college fund for you. So I'm going to need you to get a scholarship. Here you go. Most people do not have $1,200 sitting around to be like, hey, yeah, use this to go study. And where? If you're making $20,000 a year, if your family is together making 80 grand, with what money? In this economy? And it is very telling. Oh, that's great. And I was going to bring this up. We had SAT prep in high school. Some high schools do offer SAT prep and some don't. I always thought it was really interesting for my high school to be very geared towards like, hey, all of you are going to college. It's a magnet high school. Magnet schools are free public schools that they give you essentially like a track or a major. Mine was law, and they have extra resources. And even in that great school, we didn't have SAT prep. They're like, oh, we're giving you a lot, but we ain't got no money for SAT prep. Don't ask about that. Y'all better go pick up a book from the library. We don't have money for that. Thank you, Naya, for the super sticker. Let me go through super stickers real quick. Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's very interesting when you have conversations with people about affirmative action and about why affirmative action is necessary. Affirmative action is necessary because largely, overwhelmingly, holistically, Black people in this country, because of systemic racism and because of chattel slavery, are economically disadvantaged. When you're economically disadvantaged, that bleeds over into every facet of your life. You cannot undo that. You cannot outsmart that. It bleeds over into everything. Something that's seemingly so simple as like, hey, do you have access to the SAT prep course? Makes a huge difference. There's a big difference between getting a 1070 and a 1570 on your SAT. And the SAT, depending to certain people, when you ask, and I haven't done the full research on this, a lot of standardized testing is based in eugenics. And that's a blanket statement that we can do some more research into later, because different people test differently, which is not even taking that into account. All right, so let us get a little further. All right, and then shout out to Darkest You again. That was from her carousel on her website. So she is a college student out here doing the work. So if you have a little extra coins, go send her a little money at Venmo over here at Darkest You. Okay. Let's read through some comments really quick. Oh, that's wonderful. We got lucky because my pastor had a lot of connections and got us private tutoring for 5 hours our senior year. That's really great. And I've realized too, a lot of this, the access can be helped with community. And you have to have someone that knows like, hey, you have to do this. So let me help you do this, which I was the first one to go to college. So like everyone was like, oh, I don't know, go do the application. I was like, okay, whatever. Once you have someone that knows, like if there are any young people in your family or in your neighborhood, even telling them like, hey, I can't help you with SAT prep, but hey, here's the book. You can go get the book from the library. So at least they know something, because a lot of these are built on access to even the knowledge of knowing how this works. All right. Okay. Oh, wow. This is so interesting. Melanie, I graduated from a blue ribbon high school. I'm going to look that up. I'm assuming it means preparatory school. There were several people who made perfect scores. Wow. One guy made a perfect score. He told me he started SAT prep in the 8th grade. What's interesting? When I called the SAT prep place for my brother and I was like, hey, I didn't do prep, but I think if I would have, it would have helped a lot because I have a math aversion anyway. So like, let's be honest, I wasn't really trying to spend time on that. What is like the average time that students are here enrolled with you? They were like, oh, well, usually we start sophomore year. And I was like, well, he's going to be a senior. So how much prep can we cram in right now? But it's very interesting. Like it never would have occurred to me that he should have started this so much earlier. So my sister is a rising junior, so I'm going to start hers significantly earlier because I think we're similar. She's better at math than I am, but not great, So might help. Okay. All right. So because we need to talk about legacy admissions and these test scores, it has finally come out, which people have brought this up numerous times, but I think people now are in the space to finally hear it. In that, I thought this was a great title by Daily Beast for this article. Harvard admissions data shows that America loves affirmative action for whites. Yes. Shout out to Ruben Navarrete Jr., who wrote this article and this spicy ass title, because it is true. Again, the intro to this live stream is George Bush saying, hey, see students, you too can be the president of America. It's like, oh, really? If we're saying that the better your grades are, the smarter you are, which that's not necessarily true. That's actually not true at all, because I know a lot of A+ lawyers that do F- work. But anywho, if we're going to base it off of that, why is it that you have students who are literally not qualified getting into these elite institutions. And it is not because they are Black. So this was a great peer-reviewed article. I didn't do the description box yet. I will. So I'll put this in the description box, which this is what's being cited in all of the articles, as well as an upcoming civil litigation as well, which is legacy and athlete preferences at Harvard. So one of the unintended consequences of what Mr. Edward Blum, the boogeyman, did when he started this lawsuit, he opened up Harvard and UNC to discovery. And part of that was finally opening up access to all of their data. Because in order to show his point, which was that more Asian American students should be getting into these schools based solely on two factors, which was SAT and GPA, which again, that's not the rubric the school ever was using. The school said, hey, there's 5 different factors, there's sub-factors. However, that was his argument. He needed all the data to show, like, look at all these perfect scores. Why didn't they get in? And unintentionally, what he did show instead was with the data, it allowed a bunch of researchers to say, this legacy admissions is very funny, very interesting, because why are these white students who have similar grades to Abigail getting into Harvard, which Harvard is supposedly supposed to have a 5% acceptance rate? So using publicly released reports, we examined the preferences Harvard gives for recruited athletes, legacies, those on the dean's list, and children of faculty and staff. So that is what they refer to as ALDCs. If you see that, I see on like Twitter, people are posting ALDCs. That's what it stands for. So and I would say athletes make up such a small percentage of this because most of these elite institutions, they have athletics, but it's more like vanity athletics besides rowing. They love rowing, child. But like, Princeton football is not, it's not Alabama. Okay. So among white admins, over 43, and this is all the admits, this is every single student in Harvard. Of all of the white students in Harvard, 43% of them are ALDC, their legacy. So we'll just call them legacy, just easier to say than the full acronym, fall under legacy, as in they're getting special help to get into the school. Among admins who are African American, Asian American, and Hispanic, the share is less than 16% each. That's a giant disparity. Removing preferences for athletics and legacies would significantly alter the racial distribution of admitted students, with the share of white admits falling and other groups rising or remaining unchanged. 43% of the white students at Harvard do not have the qualification to be a white student at Harvard. Yet nobody's asking them, oh, is it because of affirmative action? And then the more wilder thing in that article specifically was, of the 43% of those, 75% of the legacy admins at elite universities are not qualified for said universities. George Bush comes to mind. George Bush went to Andover, a very elite preparatory school in the Northeast. George Bush, while he was at Andover, received C's. George Bush still went on to Yale to do what? Receive C's. It brings me joy, to be honest, because I can't stand Jeb Bush. Probably a smidge more than I can't stand George Bush. And that Jeb Bush is the smarter of the two of them. And I know it pains Jeb Bush that his dumb brother got to be president and he did not. Because that's what Jeb Bush gets for doing his foolishness in Florida with the FCAT. That's his penance, truthfully. And I know it bothers him. It is absolutely wild to me that in 2023, students of all shades that are not brown have the audacity to literally tell Black students and Latino students overwhelmingly to their face that we do not belong in elite institutions. We don't even belong at the public school, when 75% of the 43%, which is already large, was like, you have, how did you get in here? Why are you here? It would have behooved the small minority of Asian American parents that were so upset to sue about legacy admissions. There is no legal reason as to why all these students are getting into these schools. None whatsoever. And here's GW. Let me make it a little bigger because, one thing he's good for is a little dance, a little jig. George W. Bush, as seen in the 1966 Yale University yearbook. And it says, which it's like really blurry, so let me lean all the way in. It says, born July 6, I didn't know that was his birthday, 1946 in New Haven, Connecticut, son of H.W. Bush, class of 48, and Barbara Pierce Bush, prepared at Phillips Academy, Andover, Massachusetts, entered Yale September 1964. History major, resident member, Davenport, blah, 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 all the things GW got to do with his life. Child. That man lived a good, well, he's still living a good unearned life off of his dad. Wild, absolutely wild behavior. All right, and it should be noted on the record that George Bush himself does not even agree with legacy admissions. This is from the Spokesman Review, which I forgot to put the year in here. I believe he said this in the early 2000s. It's either late 90s or the early 2000s. President Bush, who followed his grandfather and father, both of them went to Yale. So, of course, little George could not go to Yale. Despite an undistinguished academic record, that is a read, undistinguished, said Friday that colleges should get rid of legacy admissions. See, George himself doesn't even believe in it. Preferences that favor the sons and daughters of alumni. I think it ought to be based on merit, Bush told a conference of minority journalists when he was pressed about his view on affirmative action. And I think colleges need to work hard for diversity. Asked directly if colleges should eliminate legacy preferences, Bush said, well, yes, I think so. Yeah, this is a great point. Farm D Ace, the legacy admits situation sounds a lot like the racial covenants upheld in housing, racism baked into legacy ancestry. Exactly. Which what they're talking about is there are numerous states where there are covenants written into the deeds of certain buildings with states. This building can only be rented, bought, or borrowed to white people. So they will not allow Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people to possess said building. And those in certain states are upheld by the law, which is very wild. All right. So this is back to the article. Prior research suggests that legacy applications receive large admission preferences. We observed similar patterns at Harvard with legacy applicants admitted at a rate above 30%. This is 30%, and typical applicants admitted at a rate of just 5.5%. It should be noted, because I went to the University of Central Florida, the acceptance rate at the University of Central Florida, which is a public institution for the regular people who can afford it, is 36.4%. So the University of Central Florida is basically as competitive as being a legacy at Harvard. Wild. It's very wild. So again, it is never going to cease to amaze me at the disdain and the questioning of Black people's credentials when literally George Bush and co. are into spaces they should never be allowed in. And we're finally going to see some changes to that, which hopefully we'll see where this case goes. It was a civil complaint filed by a civil rights group early last week, or end of last week, right after the affirmative action opinion was issued, in which a civil rights group now is challenging the legacy admissions at Harvard, saying that the practice discriminates against students of color by giving an unfair boost to the mostly white children of alumni. And you know what? I'm very curious to see what the court does with this. Because if we're saying you cannot discriminate on the basis of race, legacy admissions is literally legalized discrimination. And also, it's allowing for rampant amounts of mediocrity. If the whole purpose of an elite institution is everyone is the best, everyone is getting 1600, everyone has a 4.0, everyone is also saving the planet, everyone is doing all these things, not Georgie. George was drinking, and probably if beer pong existed in 1960, I'm sure he was the best at beer pong. Maybe that was on his application. George loves a stiff drink. He does. And maybe comedy, because I'm kind of convinced that he thinks he's a comedian. And on to somebody who sadly had the grades, has the brains, but is just an awful human being who largely, despite how smart Clarence Thomas is, objectively, uses it to do coonery and buffoonery. Okay. We're going to play this, which this is the origin story of why Clarence Thomas is a villain. Let me make sure.
But again, the Black students who are there, like, he doesn't feel they are like him. He's not part of the elite. They're, in his mind, privileged kids, you know, the sons and daughters of doctors and lawyers. So he feels, again, like the outcast.
He believed that people assumed he was there as a beneficiary of affirmative action, and it grated on him.
He has this feeling of, oh, I'm around these white students who he senses question his presence at Yale. How is it that you, not just you, Clarence Thomas, but you, all you Black students are here? Is it because of merit, or is it because of affirmative action? There was one law professor, Ralph Winter, who in a challenging way mentioned this. People don't think, you deserve to be here, that kind of thing. And Thomas doesn't take it as a challenge, he takes it as a slight.
Rather than try to fit in, Thomas tried to stand out.
He dressed in overalls and a t-shirt. It was kind of a uniform, but neither one of us was terribly rich, so I didn't wear overalls, but I understood what it meant for him.
With Clarence Thomas, what you see is somebody who's isolating himself. And he's kind of saying, I don't want to try to join you, maybe because he doesn't want to be rejected again.
All right. It's interesting with that, and I will link. I have a lot of links that I need to remember to put into the description box. So that way, I highly recommend watching the whole thing, which is, for context on Clarence Thomas is from rural Georgia. So largely when he went to law school, here he is, this distinguished person who has defied all the odds, gotten lucky, made it out of rural Georgia, extremely smart. And instead of his response to people questioning whether or not he deserved to be there, instead of him saying, look at what slavery did, look at what chattel slavery did, look at what systemic racism is doing, of course I deserve to be here, he took it as, and has largely for his whole career, it's in his memoir as well, been like, if affirmative action didn't exist, nobody would question me. That's simply not true. That's simply not true. Because again, when I went to University of Central Florida in the late 2010s, 10 years after affirmative action has been done away with in the state of Florida, white children were still asking this, still having the audacity and utter caucasity when they were upset that they didn't get the highest grades. You're like, you're only here because of affirmative action. Well, actually, itty boo, put the dunce cap on because affirmative action hasn't existed here in 10 years. So what's the excuse? Racism will always cause certain people to look down on Black people. Doing away with and actually having consequences for people said racism will do away with that. Undoing affirmative action, which largely has done a lot of good for certain Black people. I would say not everybody. It's not this wide thing that all of a sudden they just let in everyone. That never occurred. Certain people, yes, and mostly to state schools where they could afford it still. Affirmative action didn't just give people free passes to anything. It largely, again, benefited white women. Affirmative action should have stated like, hey, we did all these awful things. Yeah, free education for Black American people, obviously. What's the problem? But no, it never did that. And he has held on to that for all these years. And for years and years and years, he himself has tried to chip away at affirmative action. All right. Thank you, Robert. Listen, George Bush is now a painter. I don't know if you're all aware of this. Usually after they're done their presidency, presidents try to be useful, do some foreign policy. George Bush was like, yeah, I tried it. I wasn't really good at it. I'm actually kind of a war criminal, so I'm gonna paint now. So he is probably, according to him, a famous painter. And Michelle Obama's friend. Oh, the fact that we let him rewrite his character arc from full-on dumb evil villain to, funny, laughable joke in the corner is interesting. It's very interesting. All right, so let us continue. Boop. Okay. So this is from the majority opinion, which it is Edward Blum that's to blame, obviously, for this. However, Clarence Thomas wants to make himself the coon face of it. So here he goes, since he wants to be the face of it. And this is summarized from his opinion. Many universities have for too long concluded wrongly that the touchstone of an individual's identity is not challenges bested, skills built, or lessons learned about the color of their skin, he wrote. Our constitutional history does not tolerate this choice. It is disingenuous and also high levels of hubris and delusion for Clarence to really think that his life has not been hard because he's Black. Clarence, it is because you're Black, friend. It is because you are Black that these people treated you this way. Yes, the way you appear in this world, particularly in the United States of America, is how people will receive you and then take their biases, their prejudice, and their racism out against you. Wild. Justice Clarence Thomas took the unusual step of reading from the bench parts of his lengthy concurring opinion. He wanted everybody to know, yes, I personally am the token beneficiary of this billionaire who takes me on trips, but I am special. I have transcended being a Negro, so to hell with all of you. Thursday's decision, he wrote, sees the university's admission policies for what they are, rudderless, race-based preferences. Those policies fly in the face of our colorblind Constitution. It's very disingenuous, and like we won't get into constitutional history too much because it's a little dry, but this part is really interesting. Our original Constitution, not including any of the amendments, the 14th Amendment is an amendment. The original Constitution that the enslavers wrote does not mention slavery. Does not mention race. That doesn't make it colorblind. They simply said, just not gonna put it in here, because if we don't put it in here, then we have to address it, but we're gonna still, enslave these people though. We still gonna, come on, we need the cheap labor. Like, this is new capitalism, babes. Right? It's not for them. Like, some of them fought with us, Revolutionary War, but like, we not really, to say the Constitution is colorblind is a distortion of facts. The Constitution is silent on the evil wrongs of the founding fathers. That's all it is. It's not written in a way like, hey, everyone is equal. The Constitution at the time, people that wrote it did not see indigenous people as equal, did not see Black people as equal. That's only 3 sets of people that were here at that time over here. But he largely believes this. This is a huge tenet of his conservative brand of legal rulings. So, and he cited his favorite justice, which is Justice Harlan. The Constitution was colorblind and categorically rejected laws designed to protect a dominant race, a superior class of citizen, while imposing a badge of servitude on others. To which, I feel like I'm missing one. Oh, that's okay. I remember what it was. The Reconstruction Amendment had aimed to remove the race line from our systems of government, which it never did. The race line cannot be removed from this country until actual promises are upheld, until actually you have to affirmatively do something about the systemic racism. You need consequences. You need restitution. What's the damn? Why am I forgetting the R word that I always say at the time? What is the damn, not Reconstruction. It's gonna bother me. What is the, how am I forgetting this right now? Hold on, I'm looking it up because it's gonna bother me. Hold on. 2 seconds. I'm gonna remember in 2 seconds while I'm reading this. Reparations. Thank you. I was like, why? When your brain just has a complete blank, you're like, what is that word that we're talking about all the time? Thank you. Reparations. A lot of affirmative action and equal amendment, 14th Amendment is equal protection from the law. Policies would not be necessary if reparations occurred in this country. Truthfully. A good example of this is we did a live stream. Last year on student loans, and particularly the way student loan forgiveness was positioned by the Biden administration. It's gotten struck down now, but it was positioned as Black people in this country, unfortunately, are systemically oppressed, and student loans are largely adding to that oppression. So if we forgive this amount of money from Black people who have student loans, we have, basically lowered the racial wealth gap. That's literally what he said in as so many words. What he didn't take into account is, well, you have a lot of Black immigrants, myself included, that go to school in the United States. You cannot use a whole another thing as a proxy for reparations. Black immigrants, we get reparations when we finally get them. Shout out to CARICOM from King Charles. King Charles owes me a good coin from King Charles. Haiti largely is owed reparations from France, Puerto Rico from the US and from Spain, Brazil from Portugal, etc., trying to use these policies as proxies for reparations for Black American people in the United States of America is wild. It's very wild and it's disingenuous. And a lot of people that push back against affirmative action also don't believe in reparations either. I doubt Clarence Thomas believes in reparations, because Clarence Thomas thinks we need to all pull ourselves up from the bootstraps because he was so special. But if you read his memoir, which I don't know if I have the stomach to read it, but if you read excerpts from his memoir, he largely attributes sometimes that, you know what, he lucked out and people in the community were like, you know what, young Clarence is smart. Let me try to help him. He went to, I would say maybe not fully elite, but a very well-regarded private school in rural Georgia where they gathered funds to send him to the school. He didn't have to pay for it. Not everybody is so lucky that someone is like, you know what, let me help you. That doesn't happen. So yes, listen, exactly. And largely reparations, in my opinion, in the various places needs to come in, not just cash and not just land, but also infrastructure. The infrastructure of Jamaica, which always pisses me the hell off, and make sure I say the country right. One of the electric grids, the main ones in Jamaica, got sold off years ago to the country of Japan. Why? What was the reason? There are so many things. If we were to have a full-on conversation about this, I'm like, oh, okay. That's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. All right. Well, on that note, let us go into the comments. And then I've been sitting here without the AC on. So I'm like, oh, where is the button? Oh, I don't even have it over here. Okay. We're going to go through a few comments. I'm over here sweating. Okay. Yes. And this can never be said enough times. I try to say it every once in a while. Black Brit, the UK only finished paying off its compensation to the slave owners in 2015 with British taxpayer money, some of which are my family members. Again, Black people in England and white people have been paying the descendants of slave owners recompense for their loss of their property, aka their property. Oh, Lord, my blood pressure. My parents' taxes went towards paying that shit off. Yuck. They can do reparations when they feel like it. Exactly. They can. They have the money. They have the money to do reparations. They just don't have the will nor the desire. And as that article from Daily Beast so eloquently said, America loves affirmative action for white people. Legacy admissions is nothing but affirmative action for rich at this point. If we're specifically talking about the class dynamic, rich, white people. I was like, what's I'm getting hot. All right. The infrastructure in some of our countries, Lord have mercy. They've done us so wrong. Congo comes to mind, where when Belgium left the Congo, they specifically tore down and broke all of the railroads in the Congo. And we're like, haha, freedom for you. But, not with those trains that y'all built. We're going to break everything. It's upsetting. It's upsetting. All right. Thank you. They sold off the airports in Mexico too. Lord help us. I knew it was going downhill when Air Jamaica, they said, we don't need our own airline anymore. And I was like, what do you mean you don't need our own airline? What do you mean? What happened to the airline? Sold the airline off. Our country. This is largely, the IMF is largely to blame. The IMF has saddled Jamaica with large, and not just Jamaica, most of the Black third world. It's not the third world. Most of the developing countries, and I think even developing is wild. It's like we are the resources. We are the resource world, basically. We don't have taken all the resources from this place. The IMF has saddled all these countries with large amounts of debt, which we should get into that one of these days. We really should. But yeah, I know I was going to get up and but then I got to get up and it's over there. And so on that note, I appreciate y'all. Things we have coming up. Let's see. We're going to do, so there were 3 Supreme Court cases back to back last week. So tomorrow the student loan video will come out. I'm just looking at the edit for Candace. And we'll also probably on Instagram do a live stream about the discrimination case, which one of the most, it's disgusting, of course, all of that. With that aside, there is, in my opinion, a level of fraud being had in that the woman that sued is a graphic designer. She alleged that she was suing because she did not want to make a wedding website for a gay couple. However, it has now come out in numerous verified reports. The person's name, address, phone number she used was like, I never made that request. That's great. Shout out to, the gay couples getting married. However, I've been married to this lady for 15 years. I don't know what this is. I don't know why my name and my personal information is in a lawsuit, to which the graphic designer, the website owner that sued has stated, well, that's irrelevant. I was just going to sue anyway. It's giving fraud. It's giving fraud. It's giving multiple amounts of fraud, to which people are like, well, that's not the point. I'm like, that is the point. That is one of the should be one of the main points, that people now have gotten so lawless in their bigotry and their hatred. They're just lying. They're just saying wild stuff for no reason. Yeah, I'm basically saying this. Yes. Without me saying it, since she's so, litigious. So, yes, I hope he does sue her. I really hope he does. Because if my name just started appearing places, I'm like, wait a minute, this is unsafe. Why is my name? What are you talking about? So we're going to cover that probably on Instagram tomorrow. And then that will go up on Patreon for all the tiers. And then we're going to do a few other stuff as well. But yes. All right. So on that note, I appreciate y'all. I will catch y'all. We'll catch y'all tomorrow for our, the Supreme Court. Their overreach. That's the word of the week. Their overreach. And we're going to talk about student loans and the end of that, unfortunately. So on that note, I will catch y'all later. I'm going to turn my AC on. I hope y'all have a lovely night. Bye.